Welcome to the CodeBreaker Mindset, where leaders share the unwritten rules for success. I'm your host, Chitra Nawbatt. Joining us today is AJ Jones, Starbucks Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. AJ, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chitra. I'm so excited to be here and so grateful for your time. And thank you for inviting me on the show.
Starbucks, $36 billion in revenue.
Yes.
Coffee, tea,
yes,
and a few other things.
Little treats.
Tell us about the company and what's involved in leading corporate affairs.
Wonderful. So we are a company 53 years old. We have over 41,000 stores across the globe. We're in 88 markets. We right now currently have about 17,000 stores in North America between Canada and also the United States. Within that, we have a split between what we call wholly owned and also licensed. When you go inside a Starbucks in a grocery store or hotel or in an airport, that will be called our licensed business. And when you go inside a Starbucks on your local corner or a local neighborhood, that will be more likely of a wholly owned store. We have been able to create, as you rightfully noted, almost a $30+ billion business on an annual revenue. We are $128 billion in terms of enterprise value or our market cap. We have over 500,000 people who work for our company each and every day and wear the green apron. And within that, we are able to do 100 million transactions per week. And so for us, we have a sense and a connectivity to communities and also to the world in ways that others do not.
When you talk about a connectivity to communities in the world, break down each of the different stakeholders and the value you drive to those stakeholders. Because a lot of folks just think about the folks behind the counter and the consumer, the person who goes in to get their beverage, their food item, but you have many more stakeholders.
Absolutely. I like to say to people, it takes a lot to sell a cup of coffee globally. Not only do we have our farmers who are responsible for helping us to source coffee from all across the globe, we have over 200 farmers who we do that on a regular basis. And that is often tied to various blends and various customizations that we look to make sure we offer the best in terms of quality of coffee. We also service tea too as well, and that's also a global orientation in terms of those who are a part of our growing and our roasting and also our manufacturing and production. We also, if you will, when you go into a community, you got to ask for permission to open up, whether it's a drive-through or a cafe or a pickup store. And all of those require, whether it be city stakeholders, everything from those who are responsible for traffic flows and the responsibilities in terms of being able to occupy a certain space, to landlords, to those who also are thinking about economic development in their communities. Oftentimes, we are the signal for our community in terms of growth and expansion. And in many places overseas, we are also a signal of modernity, if you will, and what's to come next. And so there's so much that is involved in terms of stakeholder management. The other pieces, you can imagine, we also have, whether it's the media, whether it's also influencers and personalities, we are the only brand where people walk in with a TikTok version of a drink and ask, can it be made? And so for us, that is a huge responsibility that we hold, but one that we take dear, recognizing that we have to look at the various audiences that are part and parcel to making us the 5th most recognized brand in the world.
I want to pick up on two words you just mentioned, media and audience, and bring that together in communications.
Yes.
And dip a little bit into your background,
Sure.
which is you spent about 25 years as a communications strategist.
Yes.
And you started your career working for Congressman Jim Clyburn.
Yeah.
So talk about your journey to Starbucks.
Yeah.
Government, communication strategist. You worked a little bit for Burson, companies such as Gilead and Vanda Pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
Your journey to Starbucks.
Yes. My journey to Starbucks actually is a unique one, and I'm probably one of the most unique communicators to have this role. The reason why is because when I was a kid, I actually had a severe stutter and stammer problem. In fact, from the age of 6 to 16, I had a very difficult time actually being able to articulate and formulate words or be able to actually hold conversation in any kind of clean and unique way. And so the idea of, if you'd have saw me at 15 to say that I would be speaking on behalf of one of the most well-recognized brands in the world, or will be working on the communication strategies, whether it be in terms of Congress or publicly traded companies, it just would not have been a thing. But my journey, interestingly enough, started even a little bit before Jim Clyburn. It started actually working with the United Nations. In fact, I had a chance to be a short-term consultant on a number of different projects in Latin America, also in the Middle East, as well as in South Asia and also in Europe. And so I had this, if you will, international bug and global bug, didn't quite know where that fit was. I wound up getting an opportunity to go to Capitol Hill to advise, if you will, on healthcare policy And that took me to the highest of levels, where I wound up working for Jim Clyburn, who was the majority whip at the time, and handled both financial services and also healthcare, as well as foreign policy. When I was thinking about leaving, I had an incredible mentor who came to me, and unfortunately he has since passed, a guy by the name of Bernard Tyson. He was a former CEO of Kaiser Permanente, and he had just an incredible impact on my life. Between him and another stalwart, by a woman by the name of Robin Lynn Washington. Sorry about that. I wound up having this incredible experience as a result. And they really informed me in ways that I could have never have imagined, and kind of helped me on my path in terms of being a corporate leader, but more importantly, a person who was able to understand, to take these unique skills and really combine them together. In all intents and purposes, public policy, government affairs, communications, and even the way in which one thinks about corporations really kind of wraps itself around how well you can articulate both mission, value, and possibility. Ultimately, that's what holds us together. That's what allows for corporations to have a perpetual motion, and also allows for us to consider whether or not we want to buy or not buy, whether we want to participate or not participate, whether we want to align or not align. So much of my job is really thinking about what is the alignment that's necessary for all the different stakeholders and audiences that we're required to support, and then more importantly, how do we think about them and carry, if you will, through their mission and their ideals and their values through the values of the company, and allow for those things to then move forward accordingly, and then be able to do that in a very unique package called a product that ultimately gets handed off to you at a handoff plane.
So with everything that you just described, I want to get
Yes.
into the rules of the game.
Yes.
Because everything you just described is very intricate.
Absolutely.
Aligning diverse, complex stakeholders. How did you learn the written and the unwritten rules of the game? And what are those?
Yes. Well, I think definitely working internationally, but also working on Capitol Hill and even times after that, one of the things that I recognize, you can't truly represent any individual stakeholder unless you're able to be the best listener. So I focused on being, quote unquote, the chief listening officer for any stakeholder that was there. When people know that you actually are listening to them, you can articulate better for the needs and the issues and the concerns that they have at the table than if you are trying to assert or to assume what you think those needs are. The other piece is, I have never heard of anybody walking out of the room because a person listened too much. What people want to know is, ultimately, when I do raise a concern, or when I have an issue, or when I have an idea, where is the place where I can ultimately go to do that? And listening becomes a key part of that. The second piece is understanding what I call risk proposition. The ability to understand risk forecasting, risk analysis, and also to be able to articulate risk in an appropriate way. When you're able to think about what stakeholders are asking for, what the company is required to do, and then how do we perform against the various metrics that we are having, judgment calls come into place. And judgment calls are basically an articulation, if you will, of risk-taking.
Performance, judgment,
Yes.
risk-taking.
Yes.
Let's bring that together.
Absolutely.
Talk about top tailwind for the company right now.
Yes.
And top headwind for the company.
Sure.
Set that context.
Yes.
And then we'll go forward after you set that context.
Absolutely. We have a really unique and beautiful brand. Globally, we don't have to even put the word Starbucks. We can show the siren and everybody knows exactly what they're looking for and what they are going to partake in. And there are many people who value that. Our brand is strong globally. The Q scores of our brand are very high globally too as well. And we have a customer base that knows us and has an expectation. And we have incredible partners, people who work in our stores who are able to bring to life the beverages and all of the necessary aspects, if you will, of the experience together. And so from that standpoint, we have a motivated employee base, or as we call a partner base, when you have a motivated and well-informed customer, and when you have a product that's really uniquely designed to only be delivered by a company like ourselves, you're in a really wonderful position from that standpoint. The other piece is that we often have demand that we just can't meet sometimes. In the mornings, I'm sure you might have experienced where there may be a number of people who are asking for drinks in the cafe. There's also mobile order and pays that are coming in. There's also mobile order and delivery, and all that's happening. So there's no lack, if you will, of interest and energy within the store. The question is, how do we best serve that, and how do we meet those expectations in a timely manner, and also in a manner that also actualizes, if you will, quality at each and every turn? So that becomes the unique tailwind that we have. The headwind that we have, quite frankly, is we are a discretionary spend. And when the consumer is faced with everything from high inflation to uncertainty in the job market, to uncertainty, if you will, in consumer sentiment, all those things do weigh on, if you will, the consumer. And the consumer then has to think about making choices oftentimes in terms of where they spend their resources and why do they spend them. We try to make ourselves be not only the delightful treat, if you will, but more importantly, something that's a go-to on a regular basis, the consistency that a person says, well, of all the things that would be going on, I'm going to make room for this purchase, particularly from Starbucks. And so that is the unique challenge that we are facing, if you will, right now. I say the other piece that we're facing is a change in terms of customer expectations. When we built the stores really were around cafe experience and coming in and sitting down and enjoying, having conversations like you and I are having. Today, customers want to come in, they want convenience and they want it quick. They want to be able to push a button and walk in and grab it and go. And so how do we shift, if you will, the business model to accommodate for both ends? One, for those who want to come and sit and actually partake, and those who want to just kind of come in and run right back out because they got their next meeting or their next call to attend to.
So with what you just described,
yes,
your pattern recognition,
yes,
unwritten rule on how you solve on the headwind side and how you seize opportunity on the tailwind side.
So I think on the headwind side, the unique piece, you talk about pattern recognition, is also recognizing that we aren't the only ones facing this problem. So you can take pieces and parts of different ways that people have tried to solve certain elements and be able to bring those up. So from a headwind standpoint, one of the things that we're focusing on a lot is what we call supply chain management, and really thinking very deeply around how does supply chain become this unique engine that really unlocks not only for the customer experience, but also for the partner experience in terms of what they're able to provide on a consistent basis. And then how do we also do that in a way that's also efficient and reduces waste and other elements that are involved to be able to really bring that product along. The other piece is also shortening the timeline between concept and innovation and delivery of a new drink, a new beverage. You know, sometimes the timeline itself can be stretched or be extenuated because of various aspects in terms of testing or different things and steps one has to go through. And we think we can think more deeply around how we can align those to really kind of take advantage of those tailwinds. And quite frankly, also think about the redesign of our stores to make our stores much more oriented around the new customer behavior and demand. One of the things I failed to mention was that today, 72% of all the drinks we sell are cold drinks. But the business was actually built for more of a hot drink performance and a hot drinks delivery. So changing that is going to be that piece. In terms of how do we address some of the headwinds, there's kind of three things, and Brian has been really kind of key on, our new CEO has been really keen on this. One is really trying to reintroduce the brand back to the global customer. And you've probably seen we have new ads and new elements that we're bringing into bear to not only remind people, but also give people a sense of freshness and new things to come, to have a sense of anticipation, if you will, what the brand has to offer. The second piece is really thinking about how do we truly go global in a real way. We are a company that's based in Seattle, but for all intents and purposes, we represent a global brand, and how do we think about the re-engineering of our business to function globally too as well. And then the other piece is really being able to think about how do we leverage certain types of models of technology to really be able to allow for that flywheel of development and also for performance to really kick in. I know everybody's talking about AI, and we obviously have been focusing on that too as well. We had an AI program and project that we had called Deep Brew, which really looks at our mechanics around supply chain. But now we're starting to think about AI in other ways in terms of what does consumer opportunities that we have in terms of recommendations or consumer profiles, or being able to think about analytics in terms of buying behavior or even redemption behavior when people give gift cards. All these are things that now we can think much more deeply about in terms of looking at AI as a way of being able to allow us to move that forward.
Well, what you're talking about now gets into the pivot, so let's talk about
Sure.
that, the pivots.
Yes.
Since you just talked about artificial intelligence, AI, top use case at scale where you are investing and level of investment, if you can share, and the outcomes.
Yeah, I would say to you without bringing any confidence is at the highest of levels, we're definitely looking at AI in terms of how do we adjust the partner and the customer experience, partner being employee experience and customer experience. Right now, we have a number of apps that partners have to use in order to be able to interface and do their day-to-day job we think that we can use AI to allow for us to eliminate many of those apps and allow for a much more connected and deeper plug-in, if you will, into the way in which they run the business and also their adherence and understanding of what the mechanics of the business are. Imagine, for instance, if you were to know through the AI program what your milk load is and how soon the milk is supposed to expire, and then thinking through, instead of having to worry about checking the individual dates on the milk, you can actually think about having an alert that says to you, hey, the skim milk that's in the refrigerator right now will go bad in the next 3 months. Do we think about some type of offering where skim milk becomes a necessary part of that delivery, so therefore we're not throwing that skim milk out or wasting that skim milk? These are things that you can start to think about in reference to it. You can also think about taste profiles. So this gets more into the customer side. We are known as a coffee business, but in many respects, we also are a tastemaker. I mean, nobody thought to put pumpkin spice inside coffee until we decided to. And now today, nobody knows that it's fall until pumpkin spice latte launches, right? But in a sense, because we've put pumpkin spice in coffee, that opens up the door for other additives to be considered, whether it's ginger or cinnamon or apple, that now kind of runs across that gradient in terms of taste profiles. Well, imagine using AI to help us think about what are other combinations that can yield the same kind of performance, if you will, in terms of beverage appreciation and also consumption. So we think about those things as ways of being able to leverage it there.
With some of what you just described, you're getting into new horizons of innovation for the company.
Absolutely.
And let's talk about that, because over the last several years, maybe 7 to 8 years or so, Starbucks used to have a lock on the market, no longer.
Yeah.
It's hit some elongated rough patch. Lost its edge in customer experience and loyalty, food and beverage quality, increased competition from McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. I used to drink the strawberry smoothie with protein. I think in around 2015, 2016, you discontinued it. By the way, I just want to flag a potential correlation between discontinuing the strawberry smoothie and Starbucks.
The great thing is I wasn't there to make that call. If I was there to make that call, I'd have made a different call.
And Starbucks troubles over the last few years.
Fair.
So how do you recover? You touched on it a little bit, but let's double click and go deeper in terms of next horizon of innovation, where you attract the customer, you retain them, but you still also are able to navigate against that durability, transactional risk that you constantly face.
Sure. I think Brian has set the company on pace for that. The reason why our strategy is called Back to Starbucks is that we're looking back at the fundamentals and saying, how do we make sure we're thoughtful around the retention of the customer? How do we make sure that we are giving that sense of specialized and personalized feel? You know, one of the unique things Brian had helped us to bring back was, Sharpies back inside stores. I know a lot of people were like, Sharpies? How does Sharpies have anything to do with coffee? But there's a lot to be said when a person is writing on your cup and telling you, hey, have a wonderful day, or go out there and knock them out. There's just little pieces like that remind people that beyond the beverage, there is a connection that is here, and there's something that's special around that. And so as we start to think about those elements, and also elements in terms of how we manage our partner base to ensure that we have the appropriate amount of labor inside the store to be able to meet all the demands, these are things that are all really kind of back to Starbucks that was there. One of the first decisions that Brian made, which I was very proud of because I have family members who are affected by this, was eliminating the changes in pricing, if you will, between dairy and alt milks, and being able to allow for those that have price harmonization. That was a big deal for folks who are oat milk drinkers who may have been paying an additional amount to have oat milk. And I think that opens up, if you will, the appreciation to the customer and the customer experience. And I think you're going to see more and more of that as we move forward from him. And then, quite frankly, really thinking about the operating model. He is really kind of putting a number of plans in place to make sure that the operating model is as efficiently tied and connected to the stores as much as possible in terms of store performance.
Talk about a significant business pivot that you've led.
Oh, my goodness. The question is, which one have I not been a part of? So I think I actually want to go back and talk a little bit about some experience even before because they informed Starbucks. So for those who may or may not know, there's always this piece about, so tell me what was Capitol Hill like? And I often tell people, well, my swan song was the bank bailout. I was one of the lead negotiators for TARP. And my responsibilities, if you will, because I was on the floor, I was a part of what's called the whip office. The whip office is responsible for getting the votes and counting votes. And part of my responsibility was negotiating the package to be able to allow for it to pass. To be fair, what happened post-financial bailout, to this day, you are still living with. All the elements around disclosures, if you will, to the SEC about how business performs, everything around risk and risk adjustment, those are things that are now in the businesses too as well. And also the way in which you want things about how banks are capitalized, aspects in terms of your money, how your money moves, the performance and responsibilities for the Federal Reserve. For the Federal Reserve, all of those are things that came out of that. And that's been a major global pivot, if you will. It required us to rewrite the rules in terms of the Basel Accords, if you will, that govern the monetary systems. And so that was a part of that. The other piece I was a part of was when the negotiations were happening in terms of the auto bailout, because as you know, at the time, the auto industry was also impacted too as well. Many of the things that are in place today came out of that. And so for me to be at a center of that conversation was part and parcel. And it's kind of funny now, I was involved with the rewriting of the derivative policy. As you know, most companies use derivatives as a way of hedging, whether they're default swaps, interest rate swaps, or what have you. I was right at the center of those things, and how those are being used today was part and parcel to that term. When I came into more of the corporate side, I came right at a time when Gilead Sciences had found this cure for hepatitis C. And the question became, what should be the way in which a cure for a disease, particularly if it has a latency to it, how should that be rolled out? How should that be paid for? Who should be the proper patient to be able to receive that? And then how do you do that across various spectrums where you have disease that's impacted in various communities? And so, again, that was a major pivot, because now when we start thinking about the way in which vaccines are rolled out and how they are distributed, the way in which we think about the pricing models that are to this day around pharmaceuticals, all of that in many respects can be pointed back to some of the things that happened during the time with Gilead Sciences. And then when I think about my time on the public sector side, as you know, I worked at the Kellogg Foundation. One of the responsibilities I had in philanthropy was looking at something called narrative change. How do we bring different voices into the various structures of media today so that different stories can be told, or wider stories can be told about a similar subject? Today, that is part and parcel to how you see Hulu, Netflix, all of your streaming channels that will have various different voices that now are being able to be activated as a result of some of those investments that we made early on as a part of philanthropy. So I bring all of those, and then I come to a place like Starbucks, and one of the first things we had to do when I first arrived was rethink the way in which we institute risk analysis and risk perspectives, and also measuring customer as well as audience feedback in a very different format. And then thinking about the way in which we measure that against both KPIs and social media, and then also our public policy and our public engagements. So that has been so key in terms of the business transformation there. One of the things that you might have remembered or heard about, there was this whole new drink platform that Howard had helped to lead when he came back, called Oleato, and being a part of what does it mean to take cold foam and also think about a new beverage mix and blend using olive oil, and how that can then open up new palettes, if you will, to coffee, was something that was amazing to be a part of.
I want to get into the magic.
Yes.
What is your definition of serendipity? And where has serendipity played a critical role in a business outcome and career outcome?
Sure. No, I mean, well, first of all, I do think serendipity, coincidences, and for me, blessings, because I'm a faith-led person, has been part and parcel to the way in which I arrived to where I am. I truly do believe I am the product of grandmother's prayers and God's favor. And all intents and purposes, for me to have met some of the people in my life who then wound up coming back to be a part of where I am today. I couldn't have designed it any better. I'll give you this as an example. As I mentioned before, Bernard Tyson I met when I was on Capitol Hill. He gave me the 5 keys on how to become a corporate executive. And I followed those to a T, and I wound up becoming that. But then there were people along the way, as I mentioned before, like Robin Washington, and even individuals today, as a good gentleman by the name of Michael Conway, who used to work at Starbucks. He was part and parcel to bringing me into the ELC, the Executive Leadership Council. And that was all around these unique connections that it came because of moments and places that I was in my life. And so for me, the fact that I went to Iowa for undergrad and didn't know how important Iowa was to the world of public policy and politics, and then wound up finding myself here in Washington, D.C., and then realizing the value of what that means, and then going from there and having landed in Washington, D.C. just right after 2000 and being there all the way up through 2009, and knowing all the different ways in which the country had changed under that. Much of what we are experiencing today in this country, public policy, geopolitics, or what have you, was effectively crafted and seeded, if you will, within those first 10 years of the 2000s. And so for me, I had a front row seat into every aspect of it, and that's just allowed for me to be there. And the last piece I'll say, and I brought this up a couple of years ago. So my wife is Nigerian by background, and I might have mentioned we've been married now going on 28 years. When she and I met, we met in Iowa, freshman year, first class. I like to joke she had her eyes on me from day one, but I get to tell that story since she's not here. But the reason why I bring this up is because my journey into connecting to the globe started at the moment in Iowa. And that opened up so many doors for me in terms of being able to travel and living in 8 countries and helping to launch products in 70-something countries. I mean, it's allowed for that richness because of that closeness and that opportunity that was presented through a relationship. I like to also say that was my first PR campaign when I had to get married, was being able to convince her family and others or whatnot that I was a suitable enough gent.
What's your advice on how to cultivate the CodeBreaker mindset?
I'm very much, so I'll give you a little bit of insight of a piece of advice Bernard gave me. We were talking one day, and he asked me, was I a fan of the movie The Matrix? And for those who might remember, that was one of the breakthrough sci-fi movies ever. But there was a scene in The Matrix where Lawrence Fishburne, who played Morpheus, and Keanu Reeves, who played Neo, they're on the top of the roof, and Lawrence Fishburne says to Keanu Reeves, in order for you to become what you're destined to become, for you to step into your destiny and become truly who you are, you have to free your mind. And one of the things that I would say to anybody is, if you're gonna go into this path, that you have to free your mind from all the conventional advice that you have been given. Advice that may have said, oh, you need to stay at a job for 5 or 10 years before you think about leaving. Advice that may have said, oh, if you stay on this path, that this is the path that'll get you to this place or to that place. You really have to free your mind, because ultimately, all the counsel people are giving you, even those who love you, oftentimes is with a risk perspective and not with an opportunity perspective. And all I would ask is that people would put as much energy into stepping into their destiny as they do about trying to assess their risk. And that was his counsel to me. And if you put that kind of energy around that, it won't make sense to people. Be comfortable with your journey not making sense to anybody. But at some point, folks will read your bio and your resume, and it'll look like you did everything planfully. And the reality is you were truly following some of the passions and the opportunities that came your way and leaned into them.
How do you actually do that?
So 2 ways. One is be comfortable with the idea of having what I call micro macros, having micro visions at a macro scale. So oftentimes we get asked the question, what do you want to be in life, right? That is a macro question at a macro scale. And instead, one should maybe ask themselves, what do you want to be exceptional at? And so when one thinks about it, if you want to be exceptional at public speaking, if you want to be exceptional at being able to identify patterns, if you want to be an exceptional risk assessor, if you will, that will allow for you to then think about the macro application of that possibility way more easily than trying to figure out what is my macro vision and where can I ultimately arrive. I came to Starbucks having never drank a cup of coffee. Never drank a cup of coffee. And I'm a tea drinker. And I would often say, if you had to ask someone, who would you want as your chief communicator of a coffee company? People would say, surely someone who loves coffee. But if you are thinking about a person who's not coming to coffee naturally and coming into it, the elements that I'm able to tease out, the nuances I'm able to appreciate, the levels of depth and understanding that I will be able to dive more deeply into because it's new and it's fresh to me, allows for me then to communicate about it in a way that others may not have the same sense of passion or the same sense of intricacies, if you will, in reference to it. Not because they love coffee any more or any less, but just because they've already been appreciated and been affiliated with it, whereas I'm coming into it brand new and appreciating telling the story. Nothing like when somebody told you something new and you then having to retell it. You tell it in a way that almost you hold it and it's in your very fiber, and that allows for me to be able to do that.
You talked about people give you advice often from a risk perspective as opposed to an opportunity perspective.
Yes.
That was the other dimension when you talked about freeing your mind.
Yes.
How do you fortify your own thinking, block out the noise, if you will? How do you filter constructively between folks giving you advice from the risk perspective versus an opportunity perspective?
Yeah, two things. One,
and I say that because the conditioning
yes,
tends to be more inclined to that risk perspective.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things I actually talk about in my book, The CodeBreaker Mindset, because from a child, mom and dad or your environment will say, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. Why do you want to do that? Don't do that. So there's this inherent conditioning from that nurturing, from that nature nurture, as you get older into school, working in the corporate world, or whatever it is your profession, entrepreneur, nonprofit, whatever it is your profession. There's a lot of propensity around advisement and calculation from that risk mindset or as opposed to the opportunity mindset. So how do you free your mind, break through? Because it's a continuous lifelong process.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so two things. One is, if you're a student and reader, when you're a student and a reader of history, all of those in which you may appreciate, value, and even try to model after, they were incredible risk takers. They understood very acutely, whether it be in the world of business, world of politics, world of civil rights, or what have you. They were exceptional, if you will, in being able to understand not only the moment that was in front of them and the need to be able to meet that moment. Meeting a moment is taking a risk. And so ultimately, when you become comfortable with the idea, for me to be able to meet the moment, a risk has to be taken. And I don't know of anybody who's been able to succeed in life without at some point meeting a moment that was thrust upon them. And that is really where the definition around, I would say, going from being okay and being great is truly defined. You know, we accept this in athletics for some reason, where when it comes down to it, we want the ball in whoever is the person who's willing to take the risk to lose the game and also win it. And that is the unique element. Are you willing to be that person, be comfortable with that? And so when I look at those which I admire and take note of, they were exceptional. And what I read about them is, where did they take the risk? Where did they make that judgment call to meet that particular moment? And because ultimately, that's where the learning comes in. The second piece, again, is kind of a man of faith. I do believe in the idea and the dynamic around timing. Timing is so key to when you're taking risks, but more importantly, how you assess for risk. I'm a Bible reader, and there's a book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes. And in chapter 3, the chapter is called A Time for Everything. And it speaks to the usage of time. And the last verse in that particular chapter says that they have never seen anyone have a greater sense of satisfaction and happiness when they have it in the toil of the work that they do. And so there should be some calculation between what time you are allocating to the work that you are doing and the level of happiness and excitement and appreciation that you're having out of it. And that allows you to take risks more easily as a result.
AJ, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Looking forward to it. And you're so kind to be able to have me on the show.
Thank you for supporting the CodeBreaker Mindset. For more episodes, go to www.chitranawbatt.com to like and subscribe. Connect with me on social media at Chitra Nawbatt.